That's the theme, huh? We are getting started with citrus. So thank you all for coming. My name is Denise Menard, and I'm a master gardener, uh, as you might have guessed. And we are really excited to be able to present this class to you tonight. It's, matter of fact, one that I'm going to be paying great attention to because I could absolutely use some help with my citrus. And I hope you really enjoy it and learn a lot as well. So, as we get moving on here. Unfortunately, I have a situation here where Macs have decided to do some different things and make me a little crazy, but we got it. There we go. So, a couple of little housekeeping requests for you. I can see that everyone's really used to this at this point, but just one more time, keeping your microphone off. And we really encourage you, or request, that you keep your video off as well. It really helps us keep the bandwidth focused on the presentation. It's also a little less distracting to the speaker and just to all of us. We do recommend that you use speaker view if you want to get the very most from your screen, because that way you'll just have that one person right on there rather than having a whole list of folks covering up the important information that you have there. Anytime you have questions, you can put them in the chat window. You don't need to wait till the end. Just anytime you've got a question, put it in there. We'll keep track of everything and make sure that everything gets covered at the end of the program. There is a closed captioning button, a CC button that will turn on the closed captioning that you can put there. If you have technical or need technical assistance, I'm going to actually make a little bit of change here. Because I'm running the presentation, it's really hard for me to get to you as quickly. So if you can certainly chat directly to me, that's Denise, but I'm also going to recommend that you might want to chat with Joy, who right now has that. Oh, there she is. So that's another option. One of the two of us can answer technical questions for you, but we'll see how that goes. And just a reminder, although we are recording, I believe, let's make sure that we are recording. Well, I did not see that.
Yes, we are.
Okay, very good. It didn't tell me. Anyway, because we're recording this, we'll be sending the whole presentation to you, as well as information from the slides and all. So no panicking about if you come in a couple minutes early or you've got to run out for a second. You're not going to miss anything in the long run. It's all going to be there. So this is, oh, I love that, brought to you by. It sounds so official. Well, the UC Cooperative Extension Master Gardeners of Monterey and Santa Cruz counties, and also the residents of San Benito County. We are an organization of all volunteers. We've been around for 40 something. I've kind of lost track of the exact number, but sometime, I believe actually it was 1980 that the program started. We're sort of the community outreach piece of the agriculture and natural resources division of the UC program. And our goal is to share with all of our community home gardeners all kinds of research-based knowledge, information about home horticulture, pest management, and any sort of sustainable landscape practices. So you are the reason we are here, and we hope that we can share all of the best information with you. And I'm actually about to turn this over, if I can get my slides to work correctly, to our instructor tonight. Let's see if that will work. It does not like that. There we go. Oh, it's Loretta. There we go. Loretta, it's yours, girl.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Denise. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for having me here and letting me share what I know about citrus, and hopefully you can share some stuff with me too. I became a master gardener in 2014 after retiring from the tech world, and I babysit grandchildren, and I and I raise pigs. So, okay, we can go on.
All right. Whoops. Now I just figured out how to make it work. Unfortunately, wrong for a minute. There we go.
Here's what you'll learn today. We'll be talking about what varieties of citrus grow in our cool, foggy summer climate. We're not the most ideal citrus area, right? Because of our cool summers in the Monterey Bay. So we'll be talking about that. And we'll talk about how to care for your citrus trees, selection and planting, watering, fertilizing, pests and diseases, and some other references on where to get further help.
I think I get it. And then it goes on. Okay.
Okay, so some of the basics of citrus trees that isn't always obvious to everybody is that, they're commercially produced and composed of two pieces. There's the fruiting part on the top that has the selection that you chose at the nursery, the mandarin or the lemon or the lime, and it's grafted onto a rootstock. And this rootstock is meant to be disease resistant, semi-dwarfing, cold hardy. It has a lot of different characteristics, but your tree basically comes in two pieces. So it's important to know that. And it might even be good for you to look at your little trees or your even old trees and see if you can find the graft scar where they attach the top part, the fruiting part, to the rootstock part. It's important because of things that pop up with your trees later. Next. So, citrus originated in Southeast Asia, and so they're used to really warm, frost-free climates. Commercial citrus growing in our country is centered around southern central California and Florida, and widespread in some of the other warmer states too. So Houston areas of Texas, southern areas of Georgia, Mississippi, they can grow citrus too, as long as it doesn't get too cold, too frosty. So in our cool, foggy summer area, we can be successful with many varieties of citrus. So choose your varieties carefully. So how do you choose the site for your citrus tree? They need the hottest, sunniest place that your garden can give them that has at least 6 hours of direct sun. Even semi-dwarfing trees, they can get to 10 to 15 feet high, some of them. Some are naturally smaller, but so plan accordingly. It's going to get big and dense, and it may shade out other plants or hit a wall or hit your house, so give it room, even though you can prune it to kind of conform to a smaller space. But keep that in mind. Most of the trees you find in the local nurseries, they're semi-dwarf, meaning the rootstocks shortens them a little bit. And people I want a standard, I don't want a dwarf. Well, they get huge, and they don't even have standards in the newer orchards that are planted nowadays. The old citrus orchards, those were standard trees, and they were huge. They just get so big, though, they're hazardous to pick because of the ladders you need and that sort of thing. So almost every tree you see in nurseries is on a semi-dwarfing rootstock. And they can grow in a wide range of soils. I'm Sandy. I grew up in Riverside, which was citrus country. It was heavy clay, and they did well. They adapt. So you can, even your poorest soils, you can get citrus to grow. Not seeing a screen, Denise. It's black.
I know, sorry, technical difficulties here. See if I can get that to come back. Why do you do this to me? All right, hang on, I'm gonna stop sharing and come right back on. I don't know what it has done here. All right, sorry about that. All right, let's share again. I can. Nope. All right. Wow. This has been the most complicated thing I think I've ever had it happen like this. I can't even find the. Alrighty. Did it come back up, or am I needing to?
Not yet.
Share? Okay, hang on. I've got.
Loretta, there's
Yes.
one question, one comment in the chat about someone from Hollister and to Could you talk, is there any special considerations for the Hollister climate as well?
Right. You would get more heat in Hollister. My son lives there. And of course, the first thing I did at his new place was plant a couple of mandarins for him, and his tastes better than mine because of the sun and extra heat that he gets that I don't get here in Aromas. So the only thing about Hollister, it's going to be lower temperatures than the Monterey Bay because we're influenced by the ocean. So if you get something extra sensitive to cold, like a Mexican key lime, the Mexican lime is one of the most sensitive citrus I know to cold. You might want to protect it. Watch your weather. When you're going to get frost, cover it and give it a couple years, because once you get it a few years under the belt of growth in that tree, it can withstand colder temperatures. But for Hollister, you're actually going to taste better. Just watch out for those low temps, okay?
And the follow-up message is they bought a Buddha's hand.
That should be fine. Again, those first couple years, watch your weather when it's going to get below freezing, and maybe have a sheet or a piece of Agribon or Rime to throw over it. It gives you maybe 1 or 2 degrees of protection. That might be all you need to make sure you don't get frost damage.
Do we look like we're on the right page now?
Yeah, I think so. Well, go previous just so I know I didn't get a misses. Yeah, your site selection, your hottest, sunniest place. Okay, next.
All right, there we go. Sorry,
So-
everybody.
I have some tables of varieties. Now, these are ones that I either know from my own personal experience or the experience of neighbors, friends, other organizations in the Monterey Bay that they do well here. So there could be some not listed that you have. And if you are in the Monterey Bay and there's lists of other things that you know grows well, let me know. So I'll add them to my presentation and we can get our database to grow. Okay. So, lemons, your standard Eureka lemon is the one you find in the grocery store. Meyer lemon is a favorite all over Monterey Bay. It's a little more cold hardy than the others. It's actually a cross between a Tangelo and some other fruit. It ends up looking and tasting lemony, but it gets a little sweeter and it gets a little orangey as it ripens up. It's also a naturally smaller tree. So if you're doing pots or whatever, you might want to look at the Meyer. Some of the other lemons, Lisbon's Ponderosa is huge, thick-skinned lemon. One I want to get growing, mine's just a baby, but an Italian lemon like the Genoas and the Santa Teresas. There's some, they think they were superior, but I don't know. I have to taste them and find out, but they should do well in our area. Okay, limes. The best lime for our area of the Monterey Bay is that first one, the Bears. It's also called a Tahitian or Persian lime. It says protect below 30, but again, just when it's a baby, after a couple years, it's big enough to kind of shield itself, and maybe just a few outer leaves and stuff may get a little toasty if it gets low, but it's a really good lime. Then you have your macrut or your Thai lime. That's the one you use those fiddle leaf shaped leaves for sauces and Thai foods, and you could grate the rind. It's a really rough lime, but you can use the juice and the peel for recipes as well. The Mexican thornless, aka the key lime, that's my favorite flavored lime because I spent a lot of time in Mexico as a child, and that's the Mexican lime, and it's that beautiful flavor, but it's very, very sensitive. Mine's in a pot against a stucco wall, and it hasn't frozen, and it bears. But just saying, the thornless version of it is even more cold sensitive. So protect it if you get a Mexican key lime. Next. Mandarins. Mandarins taste better here than the other bigger sweet oranges. Maybe because they're smaller, but these are some of the ones that are really good. I love my mandarins. I'll go to my mandarins that are ripe before I go to a navel orange or a Valencia or something. I eat up all my mandarins first because they're just tastier for what they are. So these are varieties that do well here. If you're going pot, that little Kishu, it's a small mandarin, and the tree is small and the fruit is small. So be careful. It oversets. You have to thin it out, and then you'll get them a little bigger. But they're small fruits, small tree, very sweet, very tasty. But so next, and some more mandarins. The Satsuma is very good here. It's the one that'll shake in its skin at Christmas time. I have Pixies. Tango's good. Tango is that one that it's one of the fruits that they sell as a cutie. They sell the clementines and tangos as cuties. So it's very good. And I've seen this do well. The tango and the golden nugget, they do really well in Hollister for that listener. So the sweet oranges, I clumped up all the navels and the Valencia. So navel is basically seedless with a little belly button at the bottom. That's why they call it a navel. So you can tell by looking at it if it's a navel or not. So all these varieties do well here. I have the Lane Late, I have a Robertson, I have the Washington, and they're all good. I wouldn't say exceptional because that's for a hotter summer area. They'll get exceptional, but they're still so good. I'm eating them right now and they're very good. I don't know any better. But when somebody brings me an orange grown in Chico or in Riverside, it's like, oh man, this is such an intense flavor, but they're still very good. Okay, these are miscellaneous fruits. Calamanan's a little sour fruit. It's used in the Philippines for squeezing on fish and making like aids and drinks out of it. If you're in a really cool climate, maybe in the mountains or something, and the lime is just too sensitive there, this Eustace limequat is extra hardy because they crossed a key lime with a kumquat, which is hardier, and you get a little limey flavored fruit that can pass as a lime and be used as a lime. What other interesting ones here? This Indio Mandarin quat's new to me. I have a young tree. It isn't bearing yet, but it's another one of those like a kumquat that you can eat. You eat the peel and all. And it's just, I had one in the nursery when I was working in the garden company in Santa Cruz, and it just was so good. I split it in half, and my fellow coworker, we ate it, and we really liked it. Again, we're not hot enough to grow a true grapefruit here and have it be sweet. Grapefruit really loves desert heat, but this Oro Blanco grapefruit, it's a cross. And so it's very thick skinned and small fruit, but it's sweet. And if you like grapefruit juice and use it for juice, that's the one to get. You're not going to cut it in half and eat it with a spoon like you would a standard grapefruit. The fruit is so small and the peel is so thick, but it makes wonderful juice, very sweet here in our foggy climates. So choosing a tree, you're going to find a lot of different sizes. Boy, trees have gone up since COVID. Labor's high, and due to other disease issues, all citrus basically now has to be grown in a greenhouse. It has to be grown under glass because of a really serious citrus disease, and that really skyrocketed the price of citrus trees. So sometimes you might find them in a little sleeve, like in one of those pictures, or bigger grown in pots, 3 gallons, 5 gallons, and you can buy even 15 gallons. It's how much you want to spend, but make sure you choose a variety that's suitable for the space you have in your yard. Again, 6 hours full sun. Look for nice green leaves. If you're looking for one right now, you might say these all look pale. Citrus trees coming out of winter, they're all yellow, just about everywhere, unless they just came out of the greenhouse. They're going to be yellowed because they're native to Southeast Asia where it's warmer in the winter. So they kind of go a little semi-dormant for us. And even though there's fertilizer in the soil's fertile, the leaves may still be yellow. So don't be alarmed and overdose your citrus trees on fertilizer in the winter. That's not doing them any good. Wait till they get warm up and the soil warms up, and then you can adjust your fertilization habits. So again, don't choose a root-bound tree. If you get the chance, gently lift it a little or poke your finger in there and feel for a dense mat of roots. If your finger can poke in, it's not so root-bound. That's what you want to avoid, because you try to plant a root-bound tree and you're messing with the roots and cutting them, and it can put your tree into a little bit of shock. So try to find a tree that even is a little undersized, more than oversized for the pot that it's in. So here's what you want to do when you're planting it in the ground. Again, select your site. Keep in mind that even in 1 yard, you can have warm spots that are maybe a little higher elevation, and you can have low spots where cold air flows and pockets. So try to find your warmest spot in your yard. And when you plant, don't dig a really, really deep hole. You can dig it wider, but dig it the same depth that it is in the pot. And the reason for that, and it was a mistake I made when I first started planting a bunch of citrus trees, I dug this huge hole. So that fluffy dirt, when you backfill underneath your plant, it sinks after you water. And you don't want your root crown of your tree to sink below the soil level. It's not healthy for the tree, and it can make it prone to diseases and such. So you'd rather have a tree that's a little above the ground than below the ground. And don't be alarmed if you see a few little roots on this tree you buy that are poking out at the top of your pot. It's okay. Citrus don't mind that. Don't think you have to cover up all those roots when you plant the tree. Don't plant it deeper than it was in the pot. It's used to growing that way. You can go a little wider. That's fine. And if you have a hard soil, kind of with your shovel, rough up that hole so it's makes it a little easier for the roots to dig in. Holes that are nice and smooth and hard, it'll just encourage your roots to circle, which you don't want it to do. You want them to dig into that soil. So you're just going to gently remove the tree, slide it out from the pot, support the root ball, and settle in the hole. And if your roots are really tight and bound, they've been in the pot too long, instead of massaging it like we're used to being told to do to loosen up those roots, don't do that. Just make a few vertical cuts, about a 1/4 inch deep with a sharp knife, vertically through that pot, through that root ball all around. And those cuts will stimulate new little roots to grow from where you cut. So that way you just less shock as possible to your citrus. Then you backfill with your existing soil. Don't think you need to put all kinds of manure and mulch and things in this hole. It just makes a really nice hole. But what happens a lot of times, and this is with any tree, is those roots like it so much in there, they'll circle around in that nice fluffy mass that you made and they won't branch out. And a tree whose roots circle, it's not anchoring well, it'll strangle itself, and it can eventually fail because of that problem. So you want your roots to go out. Don't amend very little. If you must, because you have just solid hard clay or solid pure sand, put a little organic matter, but keep it down to 20%. Okay, don't put a whole bunch of great compost or something in there. You want it to get used to its native soil. And you can reserve the organic amendments like the little picture and put a nice mulch on top after you plant. That organic matter will break down and then the trees will love it. So just keep it away from the trunk, a few inches away from the trunk so you don't have any problems with rotting things right at the trunk of your tree. And this little basin thing, I do this, and it just makes it so when you water, it directs water to that root ball that was the pot. The roots, I've seen problems with watering systems and drips put at the drip line of a newly planted tree, but the roots aren't there yet. They were in this pot, they were kind of tight in the pot. So you have to make sure at first that root ball gets watered and the surrounding area a little bit, and then the roots will branch out into the surrounding soil. But so that's why I do a basin. You can do what works best. If you have drips, make sure you have a drip right at the root ball, and then maybe another ring of drips a little further out. But important to keep that root ball that doesn't have a lot of soil in it, but may have a lot of roots, important to keep it moist till your tree starts to root in. So if you're going to grow trees in a pot, there's so many beautiful pots out there, but people have problem. They pick these beautiful ginger jars and rounded pots. Stay with straight-sided pots because you have to be able to get this tree out and when it's ready for a bigger pot. And then just think about it. If the pot encloses and gets narrower at the top, you're going to have to really either cut the root ball to get it out of there or break the pot. So straight sides is better. The clay pots that have an angled side up, those work fine because you're still going from a smaller area to a wider area to get the tree out. So don't get one of these potting mixes that have Miracle-Gro and moisture crystals. You don't want to retain moisture. You really want to make sure that you drain and you have air in there. So that's why for planting in a pot, use a gritty, well-draining soil mix. Like you can either use 100% cactus soil, which is meant for succulents and cacti or in palms. You can use that. It's very gritty, sandy, has a lot of perlite in it. Or you can mix that 50-50 with a high quality bag soil, but at least get 50% that real gritty draining mix because you want the citrus to drain. Otherwise you start getting root rot problems. So again, gently slide it out, set it in your new pot, keep your soil level the same as it was in your old pot. So you may have to put a little soil at the bottom to lift and firm it in gently and leave a little 1 to 2 inches of space to hold water to fill up your pot, and make sure that pot has good drainage holes in it. Okay. If your tree is really young and has a very flimsy trunk, stake it loosely. And what I mean by loosely is you get them in the stores or the nurseries, wherever, and they're like bound within an inch of their life to a stake of some sort. Take that out, loosen it, move the stake an inch and loosely tie it. This young little tree has to be able to move a little bit, sway a little bit in the wind, and that's how it gets strength in its trunk. Folks that leave a stake tied tightly to a tree, any tree, but a citrus as well, when it's growing, they take off the trunk and the tree will just kind of flop over it because it is never exercised. It's like having your leg in a brace or a cast for a year, never exercise it. You take that off, you can't walk on it yet, right? You have to strengthen it. So allow it a little space to move. Avoid the moisture crystal potting soils. Sure, you don't have to water as often, but it keeps wet situations around your tree roots, which really aren't good. You want them to drain as well as you can. And you can add your fertilizers. I'm an organics girl. We tend to love our organics. But follow the instructions on your bag for whatever fertilizer you have. And the reason I recommend it, maybe a citrus blend of fertilizer, one geared towards citrus, is because of the special nutrients that citrus needs. Like they need a little extra calcium, extra iron, and a little acidity. Organics will have a little sulfur in there. Citrus are slightly acid loving, and so they can make much better use of the nutrients when they're a little bit acidic. And watch your tree in the pot because you will need to repot it at least every 3 years. One, because the soil will degrade and you'll just have a bunch of roots in this pot and be watering it twice a day and this tree suffers. So make sure you always keep it in the right size pot for its size with a good soil.
Loretta,
Yes.
we have a question about someone said, my citrus, Meyer lemon, and a blood orange are all in pots. I'm pretty sure they're root bound. May they be repotted into the same size pot? If yes, how? How is it okay to trim the roots?
Yes, you can trim the roots, but you're also going to have to trim the top. So basically kind of what you're doing is a little bit like what bonsai masters do to keep things small, because you're trimming root. And what that does is it means you have a lot less root, but you still have the same crown that those roots were supporting before. So you have to prune in both places when you do that. So maybe that year you have to cut, if you cut up 20% of the roots away, cut about 20% of the top away and sacrifice maybe a year of fruit. But then it should be stimulated to put on new growth. And that new growth is where you get your blossoms. So just know that you will set your tree back a little bit because you have to prune the top. But if you want to keep it in the same size pot, that's what you have to do. Okay. And okay, so for fertilizing, we're all kind of different. I don't fertilize as often as most commercial bags of fertilizer tell you have to. I think that's overdoing it. I fertilize enough to where I get a good crop and my tree is healthy. So it kind of depends on your soil, but 2 to 3 applications. And usually it's one of those fertilizers. If it's not for citrus, it'll have a good amount of, a little higher amount of nitrogen than the other minerals and nutrients in the fertilizer. You can use liquid fertilizers. They'll have to be applied a little more often because they tend to wash through. Organics last longer. They tend to take a little longer to be effective because they have to break down a little bit and get to where they can be used. So it depends. If your tree is really suffering, I would hit it with a liquid fertilizer, like a fish emulsion or another good quality liquid fertilizer, according to the directions, and get nutrient to that tree as quickly as possible. The other thing you can do with liquid, it helps to spray the leaves with it. They will absorb nutrient through the leaves as well, and it might help from both ends, help get your tree a little greener, a little faster. But don't overdo it. Don't think if the little's good, a lot is better. You'll burn out your tree, either whether it's in a pot or in the ground. So look at your directions on that for particular fertilizer and fertilize accordingly. In pots, it's going to need to be fertilized more often than in the ground because you're watering more often because it's a small little pot. It's exposed to the temperature more than ground is, so that pot is warmer. So you will need to water more, and that means you're fertilizing more too. So again, I talk about fertilizers that are blended for citrus because of the extra calcium, iron, little higher nitrogen, and a little bit of acidifier that's in a citrus fertilizer. So I'm asked a lot, how do I know when to water the tree? Well, hopefully it's not when it's wilting, right? You might see leaves start to get a little taco curl to them, look like, we call it taco leaves. That means that they're trying to conserve water. It's thirsty. But the best indicator is your finger, because the amount you need to water depends on your soil, the size of your tree, your location, how warm you are. So best bet, use your fingers, just dig it into the soil around your root ball, stick it in there and see if it's dry, because your roots are close to the surface. And that's your best indication to help you figure out your watering schedule. And of course, it'll be a lot less in the spring. I haven't started watering my big trees yet. I will probably end of May. They'll be ready to start on a program if we don't get any more rain. But that's your best indication. If you have a meter, that's fine. That tells you, it makes little noises, whether you're dry or moist or whatever works best for you. But usually being observant, and I like to feel. I use my fingers. So if it's newly planted, again, because that root ball is all close to it's an image of the pot that was in and in the ground, you have to water a little more often and close to that root ball. So if I planted a tree right now, I'd be watering it maybe twice a week to make sure that root ball stays moist, to give the tree time to expand out and grow out. If it was summer when I planted my citrus tree, I might water it 3 times a week if it's hotter. So, but once your tree is mature and the roots are established, my schedule is about every 2 weeks in the summer, and those hot times during the fall that we get, I'll water every 2 weeks. So for pruning, you only need to do it for a citrus to control the size. If that's an issue, if you have a small yard or it's close to a wall, you'll need to do some pruning. Or if it's out of balance, sometimes like the tree in that picture, you'll get this one branch that just shoots out and has all this growth on it. So cut it back. It's okay. Prune it to balance out your tree. But you don't have to prune it every year like you would a peach tree or something like that. Because if you're always, it blooms on those new little shoots that grow mostly on the outside of the tree. and on new growth in the inside of the tree. So if you're always pruning, I had a customer once that said they don't get any fruit. And I talked to them about their pruning methods, and they were basically lollipopping this beautiful little tree. It was healthy and green, but because they were always cutting off that new growth, they never got fruit because that's the blooming wood they were cutting off. So watch out for that. And then keep the trunk clear at the base. It doesn't have to be, it's whatever looks good to you. I would prune it so it's not too close to the ground. I lost a tree because my lower branches were so low I couldn't see that a ground squirrel was coming in and munching on the bark on my trunk, and it girdled the trunk of my tree and killed it. It was a beautiful mandarin, my best one, and it died because I couldn't see that it was getting damaged there. So you want to keep a little bit of your trunk clear so you can see what's going on. Protecting from frost. Again, this is mostly with your young trees. Hopefully it isn't a tree that is just way too frost sensitive for your area that you're always going to be battling with to keep alive. Select prudently. But there's different things you can use. Some people use sheets. There's fabric you can use that allows sunlight in. It's called Rime or frost cloth. I see them at nurseries on rolls. And depending on the thickness, it's either very sheer or half sheer or whatever. So those can protect your trees when you are watching the weather, know you're going to get a frost. If you really are going to get an unreasonably cold northern storm comes through or something, some people still use those old-fashioned, what they call the C9 Christmas lights. I see people use them in their citrus and avocado on those really, really cold nights. And I guess you just have to run a lot of extension cords because those lights generate a lot of heat. And that under one of those remes, it can keep your tree from getting frozen. Common pests. So there's a lot of stuff you can get, but the ones that hurt the most and are the most common are what I'm going to list here. Now, that first picture, you see aphids, and they can come in a lot of colors, black, green, brown, and they suck the juices out of the leaves and they cause the leaves to curl up and then the leaves fall off. It's not devastating in general. It can be if it's not addressed. You can just treat by hosing off with water. They respond very well to soap sprays that pops their soft little body. Soaps, you can use soap and water. They get suffocated with a horticultural oil treatment and these other chemicals I list here are organics, pyrethrins and neem. But really what you need to look for is look for ants, because those ants are the ones that they farm the aphids, because the aphids suck the juice out of the leaves and they either pee or they exude sweet nectar after they do that. And so that's why you see all this stickiness around where you have aphids and stuff. Well, then the ants come, they love to eat that stuff. And then they also grow sooty molds. Fungus loves sugar, right? So you'll see black molds start to grow there as well. And it's all down to the ants. So if you treat and it comes back, look for ants at the base of your tree, and you can get these boric acid, taro baits, or other tree stakes, ant bait stakes that you can put at the base of your tree to get rid of the ants. And you'll see a big slowdown in the spreading and proliferation of aphids and some of these other pests too, like the scales. Some scale looks like cotton right below there. White scale, you'll see brown scale that looks like little barnacles on your tree. And again, it's all, they'll suck the juices out of your tree, and it's oftentimes accompanied by ants. So get rid of the farmer and you'll have a lot less trouble from things like aphids and scales. One thing about scale I should note too, though, I've seen is I had a customer say, well, I spray and spray and spray and the scale's still there. Here's what you need to do. When you see something scale, it looks like a little brown barnacle or even a white scale, squish it with your thumb so you can see that it's juicy, it's alive. Because what happens, especially with the brown scale, is you'll spray and you've killed that scale. You sprayed it with pyrethrin or suffocated it with horticultural oil, but it doesn't fall off the tree like a barnacle that's still stuck on a boat. That scale is still there. So don't think you have to keep spraying for it to disappear. It's dead, and you can tell by flick it with your fingernail. If it's just flakes off and dry, it's dead. So don't overdose your tree on chemicals for something that's dead and just hard to tell. This leaf miner is common, and people worry about it, and they bring in the leaves to the nursery. It's usually not an issue. It's an insect that burrows in between the surface and the both surfaces of the leaf, and it makes these little tunnels. It's usually not devastating. Pluck off the leaves and destroy them, or wrap them in something that'll contain them and throw them away, so it doesn't, you don't continue the cycle of the insect hatching out of there and going on and laying more eggs that lay larvae and burrow into your leaves. It makes the leaf unsightly. You can pluck that leaf off, but once the insect is in between the leaves, the insecticides don't kill it. It's protected because it's in between. It's sandwiched in between surfaces. So you'd have to catch it when it was in flight or just before it burrowed. So don't worry too much about it. That I've never seen cases devastate the tree, but pluck the leaves and destroy them to try to get rid of the cycle. A few leaves won't hurt. Okay, we talked about the sooty mold. I see that a lot in trees that maybe have a sprinkler watering system or are a little too shady. When you don't have a lot of airflow and a lot of warm sun, you may have sooty mold. You can scrub it off just with a soft brush and soapy water. I had a tree that did that for a while, and it washes off. Again, hopefully it's not accompanied by ants, but if it is, treat for ants. But it washes off, and you do need to get it off. It does interfere with the photosynthesis of the tree if there's too much of it all over your leaves. And then the last one is the ants that we've been talking about. So they're the cause of many citrus pest issues. They farm aphids and scales for their carbohydrates and stuff. So treat for ants with ant traps or ant granules at the base of your trees. Nutrient deficiencies. Some of the most common ones are the winter yellow leaves that we talked about. Don't fertilize in the winter. The soil is cold. Your fertilizer isn't going to do much because all the microbes that make use of that fertilizer, that help the fertilizer get to the trees, those microbes are still dormant when the soil's below 50 degrees. So let the soil warm up and then fertilize. And then if it's really nutrient deficient, once everything's warm, liquid fertilizer, leaves and soil will work a little faster than granulars. But in general, if you do a good feeding, your last feeding in the fall, then just let it go winter, regardless of whether it's yellow, and then start when things are warm in the spring again. Like now, the nights are getting warmer, the soils are warmer, the fertilizer is probably going to have a better effect starting in May-ish. A lot of people fertilize in February. My soil where I live is still pretty cool, so I don't waste the fertilizer. Lack of iron. If you see the veining patterns in the leaves, that's usually a lack of iron. Citrus they do like their iron. And there could be a couple reasons why. Even if you fertilize, say you give it ironite or something, and you say, but it isn't greening up. At that point, what it could be is if you have very alkaline soil or you're in a pot, you need to acidify a little bit, because if things are too basic, if your soil is too alkaline with our lime in our soil, etc., it locks up the iron. So it's there, but it's not available because the pH isn't right. So you may have to acidify a little bit, and that's where I talk about the soil sulfur or aluminum sulfate. You can find that at nurseries, and just apply per the package instructions. I use it on my blueberries to get, they like it really acidic. People give it to their hydrangeas to turn them blue, same chemical. So you might need a little bit of that. If you know you already put enough iron. If your tree needs general fertilizer, give it a good general citrus fertilizer that has the iron and the calcium and a little bit of sulfur. That's good. You may even have zinc, which is that other modeling down below. But you can apply other liquid kelp has good amounts of zinc if that's what you think is wrong with your tree. But try your general fertilizer first. And there's other different patterns if it needs magnesium. it's a little odd pattern. You can give it a little bit of Epsom salt in water if you've determined it's magnesium. Don't go hog wild with the Epsom salt. People, I see them feed tons to their plants. It is a salt, and you don't want all those salts in your soils for a lot of reasons. So just give it what it needs, and don't overdo it. Don't have a rote program of automatically feeding salts to your trees every year. They get enough of it in the fertilizers we give them. So wait for you to determine what the deficiency is and make sure you treat according to that. Next. Citrus greening disease. This is what I was talking about that's devastated Florida citrus, California citrus. It's in most of our counties now in California. It's slowly creeped up. I think we got some citrus imported from somewhere, and it's a bacterial infection that once the tree gets it, until they find the cure, it's gone. And it takes a long time for the tree to die and a long time for it to show up. Because you look at that mottled leaf and you might think, well, I have a mineral deficiency. Your fruit will start looking kind of browny and shrivelly. And then that's kind of the sign. You get this wavy pattern in the leaves. You get the fruit that's shriveling. And then unfortunately, you might have HLB or Huang Long Bing. It's carried from tree to tree by a flying insect, a psyllid, that sucks the juices from one tree and passes it on to the next when it goes to suck another tree's juices. And then it lays larvae, so the psyllid hatches and grows, and then it takes flight, and then it can carry the disease again. And because of this, you really shouldn't trade backyard citrus scion wood for grafting, because you don't know, your tree might have it and isn't showing symptoms yet. It takes a couple years for it to show and a few more years for it to kill your tree. So there's a lot of folks that want to turn their orange tree into a citrus cocktail tree and have other varieties growing on it, which is a really fun thing to do. But you shouldn't do it getting a piece from your neighbor or something. I have a link. The CCPP is run by the University of California, and it's the Clonal Citrus Protection Program, and they have lots of budwood, lots of certified clean trees. They test their trees periodically. The trees are clean of the infection, and you can buy budwood from them, so you know you're starting with good wood when you graft. So that link will be on the back for you. So watch out for that. It's there's promising things coming through from the universities trying to combat it. It's almost like, well, can't you just come up with an antibiotic, a citrus antibiotic that'll just kill it? They're looking at different things to try to fight this disease, because it's really affected, like say, the Florida citrus, commercial citrus grows. Okay, here's some things that are really common that people don't know what happened to their tree, or the common question is, why are my oranges so bitter? Or why are my lemons deformed? They think it's a nutrient deficiency, but what has happened is, I remember we discussed that your tree is two parts. There's the fruiting scion on the top, and there's the rootstock. Well, that rootstock is very vigorous, and oftentimes it sends out suckers below the graft line of vigorous growth. And you think, oh, my tree finally dug in and it's finally growing. And they let this huge growth grow. The fruiting part of their tree suffers because all the energy is getting stolen by that vigorous new growth that's growing up, and eventually their top dies. But they have this rootstock, and it'll give these bumpy, lemony looking things or really bitter oranges. Those are the two I see the most often. And they think they can make them sweeter by fertilizing. And it's not. It's a rootstock. It wasn't meant to be eaten. It's meant to be a good semi-dwarfing, hardy, strong root for a nice fruit on the top. So watch out for those. And you can tell by tracing that funny growth, that big vigorous growth with a lot of thorns, to the trunk where it comes out, and it's almost always below that graft scar. So cut it away and give your fruiting tree a chance to recover. Okay, open for questions.
We have a few questions that have popped up. So the first question is, what are signs that your lime got cold? I assume means like frost damage. How can you tell?
It'll start, the leaves at the tips, the outer edges of the tree will kind of die. They'll turn black, brown first, or wilt first, then turn brown, then turn black, and you have to just cut it off. It got frostbitten. That's a symptom of a lot of trees that are sensitive to cold. They start by turning a little brown, wilty, and then turning black and drying. So just cut them off. But it's very much from the outside in, and the inner parts of the tree may be fine because it protected itself.
Can you use a chemical hand warmer packet to stave off cold damage?
I imagine you could, if you know how many, if are they going to stay warm for all night? You know, back in the day, I grew up in Riverside and they still smudged. I'm old enough to remember the smudge pots, and they used old motor oil or something in these pots and made these really smoky fires to keep the groves warm. And then those got replaced by these big windmills, these fans that would at least blow the air around, because if the air moves, it has a less tendency to pool and pocket in cold areas. And then they would turn on sprinklers, because if you wet the tree when you know it's going to be a hard frost, that ice is cold, but it actually can protect the tree. If it freezes into ice, it can protect it from getting colder, just like how you can live in an igloo in the Arctic, right? So it's warmer in there. So I imagine hand warmer would work. That might be kind of an expensive way to keep your tree warm, but it would work. And you wouldn't have to run extension cords with C9 light bulbs, Christmas lights, to your tree. But, you know, maybe those big dips are still out there. I'm sure they are. We'll get these weird winters where we get that polar vortex or whatever come through, and you don't want your citrus and sensitive trees to die. So we're going to protect them however we can.
Thanks. The next question, is there a way to tell the variety by looking at the tree? I have a lime tree, but don't know what variety it is.
The leaf helps, but you also need to do a picture of the whole tree and the fruit, a picture of the fruit, and cut the fruit in half. That all helps determine the variety of lime. And there's not a lot of I don't see a whole lot of commercial limes unless somebody was custom grafting from rare limes. But you see the bears, and know that limes, all limes that I know of, when they're ripe, they turn yellow. So don't think you don't have a lime because it turned yellow, and then you don't think you have a lemon. It was a lime. Only the ones in the store, they pick them green. That's how they're picked and sold. So they're juicier when they're yellow. But if you want to know what kind, that's your best bet, is to take it to somebody with a picture of a tree, a close-up of the leaf, and a close-up of the fruit, both whole and cut in half so we can see the inside and see if it has seeds, etc. And maybe you're one of those rare ones that has something that doesn't conform. A lot of people grow citrus from seed. You can grow it from seed. It takes a while to fruit. You graft it and you've got fruit in 3 years, but a seedling may take 8 years to fruit. So most people tend to buy a grafted tree, but you may get something totally different when you plant the seed of a lime that was a little different from the mother lime that seed came from. And in that case, you can name it yourself, because it isn't a bear's. Maybe its mother was a bear's, but it is its own tree. So that's possible. I see a question here about tanglefoot.
Yes.
Is the tanglefoot barrier helpful? You're battling scales. Okay, have you looked for ants? The tanglefoot will help the ants not climb up in the tree, but it might be better to bait underneath the tree to have the ants take that bait back to the nest and kind of kill your ants. I don't want to sound bloodthirsty, but when it comes to these things that just devastate my trees, I'm kind of merciless now. So if the scales keep coming back, look to see, are you in a real shady area? You want to have good airflow in your tree. Maybe prune a little to open it up and get more airflow and sunlight in. I don't know the state of your trees, but I've seen some that grow so dense and in a shady area that they were protecting scales and sooty mold. So pruning a little bit to open up and add more airflow and more light helps a lot. And just then start washing off that sooty mold, wash off those scales, control the ants, and then see how quickly they come back.
And we have two related pruning questions about timing. What time of year is best to trim roots and repot? And when pruning citrus trees, are there months that are best to prune, or can we just prune whenever? Does it matter if we prune during the day or night?
So, I guess it depends on the reason you're pruning. If it's one wayward branch, I've had that happen before. When I planted a mandarin, it didn't do anything for 2 years. And this happens often with a potted tree. They kind of go in a little bit of shock, but then it just shot up this one growth and it totally looked unbalanced. And first I thought, oh man, that's a rootstock sucker. But when I looked at where it was coming out, no, it was a mandarin branch, but just one vigorous one. So I just trimmed it to balance the tree. If you're trying to reduce canopy size because your tree is just too big overall and it's bumping into the fence and your house wall, or the neighbor's complaining that it's shading out their roses or something, then you have to take some off. And I would try to do it maybe after you got your fruit harvested. If you do it now, you can prune now, but when you look at your trees, any new little growth, you're either already blooming or there's new growth that has these tiny little buds on it that are going to be flowers. They're going to bloom. So you may not want to prune when you're going to cut off all your blooming wood. But if you prune, say, in the middle of the summer and maybe even you take some fruit, that's kind of a good time too, because it will shoot out. It may prompt it to shoot out a little new growth that will bloom next year. I'm just trying to avoid you cutting off all your blooming wood, but you may have to if you're really doing a real drastic canopy reduction on your tree. And when you're talking about the potted plant of when to do that root and cut, again, you may want to do it maybe in the fall when it's not so hot to where it's going to be stressed by heat in the pot. And it has kind of a little bit of a winter dormancy. It has some growth period left in the fall because we warm up again, but then it has winter afterward to just kind of rest a little bit and chill out before spring stimulates it to start growing again. So for something like that, if it was a pot, unless it's drastically in need of a new pot because it isn't going to withstand this growing season because it has no soil left, you're watering constantly, it doesn't retain any nutrient, then maybe you have to do it now. And that might mean you sacrifice a little canopy growth, but roots are going to be vigorous now. So you can trim, use a saw and maybe cut off an inch or two of roots off the bottom. And then take that saw around the edge and take an inch off or two off around the edge, put it in the same pot with fresh soil and see what happens. See if it was enough to get your tree stimulated into growing again, but not cut so much where it's just going to falter. But it may. They're a little sensitive to root cutting, and they may transplanting and root pruning, transplanting a tree. It may sit there for a year or two till it digs in again. The other thing that's important, I don't know if I mentioned it, but if you get a new little tree, people love these Meyer lemons that have all these little baby lemons on them right now. Cut them off. You're not doing yourself any favors. You'll get this, your tree will put its all into ripening this lemons or mandarins or whatever it was that were already growing on this new tree, and it won't focus so much on the roots. And so you get that one crop and then you won't see anything for 2, maybe even 3 years because your tree is so depleted that it's working those next 2 years to get root growth in, and it won't hardly bloom or won't set fruit because it was exhausted as a baby tree because too much, you left all that fruit on there for it to try to ripen when it was still immature.
We have a couple of other questions here. Can the semi-dwarf citrus trees do well in pots as a pot plant instead of being planted directly in the ground? And another question about pomelos in Hollister.
Okay, so semi-dwarf, all that means is it's maybe 2/3 the size of what it would have grown if it was on a standard rootstock. So, for example, a semi-dwarf Washington navel orange, I wouldn't put that in a pot because it's a big tree when it's not on dwarfing rootstock, and it's still a big tree even on semi-dwarf. You're going to have to be really cutting it back. If you're going to have citrus in pots, choose trees that are naturally smaller. And yes, and then they'll have that added benefit of being on a semi-dwarfing rootstock. So If I was doing oranges in a pot, the smaller oranges that I've seen, Caracara isn't as big. Midnight Valencia tends to be slower growing and smaller than my other oranges that tend to be bigger. The Washington Navel, the Robertson Navel, they're bigger trees. I wouldn't put those in pots. Meyer Lemon is a good one for a pot because it's naturally a small tree. A lot of mandarins. There's some beautiful Owari Satsuma has a little bit of a weeping habit. It'd be great in a pot as long as you kept it to the right pot size for the tree because it's a naturally smaller tree. That Kishu mandarin is really small. Kumquats are naturally small, so they make a good potted citrus. What other things? Some of the lime quats and such. Oh, and then you're asking about a pomelo in Hollister. Good question. I'm not sure right offhand what the temperature minimums for a pomelo are, but they'll get sweet there because of the heat. Just watch your minimum temps. And I would look up your variety of pomelo. I don't know if it's a Chandler you're looking at or there's some of these other rare pomelos, Tahitian ones and Valentine. And we just need to look up their low temperature tolerance so we know when you need to protect them. But again, it'll have that same habit of once they get bigger, they will protect themselves. And you can have some protection for them too if you plant them. Don't plant them in the wind. Plant them on the opposite side of the wall or in a different part of the yard where they have natural protection, maybe from your house walls or a fence or something, or another tree to give them a little protection. I'm new to pomelos. Mine are small. I have that Oro Blanco. They call it a grapefruit, but it's not. It's probably more of a pomelo cross. That grows great in aromas without any protection. But some of my newer ones, I don't know. They're baby trees, but I have the Valentine and I have that big Tahitian pomelo that we'll see how they do.
We have a couple of specific scenarios here. After planting my my grapefruit and kaffir lime into a pot, I'm not muckroot. I'm not seeing any growth after 2 weeks. Should I be worried? My other citrus tree planted in a pot around the same time is showing growth. And how long should I wait before I should be worried?
Don't be worried. Like I say, it's not you. It's the tree, and it's dependent on a lot of different things, but a lot of them will just sit after they're transplanted into a pot, and you may not see a lot of growth. 2 weeks is quick. If your other one's growing at 2 weeks, it didn't miss a stride when it went from one to the other, and that might happen to just have been at the amount of root growth. It wasn't bound at all in the pot it was in, and it was expanding at that time. It had a careful transplant, so it just succeeded in expanding without anything to stop it. But you can't say that for everything because maybe the other ones were a little more bound when you transplanted them, and it's going to take a little while longer for those roots to wake up and expand out into your pot. No growth in 2 weeks, or that. I mean, the one that did grow in 2 weeks, that's phenomenal, excellent. But don't expect to see a whole lot of growth now. I planted a tree, a little Meyer, in, was it fall, midwinter, and it hasn't done anything. Now I'm seeing the new growth, but it just sat there for all winter. So don't be discouraged. Soil has to warm up and stuff too. So,
do you have, let's see, let me start with, do you have a recommended size pot for Meyer lemons?
It'll change as the lemon grows. Look at the pot you buy it in. If you bought it in say you bought it in a 5-gallon that's, I don't know, 8 inches across at the top, maybe. When you first pot it, just go a couple inches bigger at a time, width-wise, on your pot. And this is true for houseplants, for any plants in pots, basically. You don't want to put a little tree anticipating all this growth and put it in a big pot. What that does is it has all that fresh soil holding moisture because there's nothing growing in it around those roots. And you can actually rot out your roots by doing that. So just go a couple inches bigger than the pot that it was in, growing in, a couple inches at a time until you get the tree to where you don't want to let it grow anymore and you have to start cutting off a couple inches of roots and a couple inches of growth.
If repotting, would adding some acid potting mix added to cactus potting mix be a good idea?
That would work. I don't see any problem with a little acid mix in your cactus mix. That's fine.
And when pruning a branch, where do you prune it back to?
To whatever looks right. Citrus are so dense. I almost think of them as a hedge, and you're trying to keep a natural shape, and so prune it to where it looks good. It's not always necessary. Like, it's so critical with roses when you cut to a bud, and your fruit trees you cut to where it's going to grow out. Citrus are a lot more forgiving in that way because of the way they grow and because they tend to be so dense inside. So balance your tree, or if you're cutting because it's so dense, you need a little more air in, then maybe those inner cuts prune to the branch that sprout is coming off of. Because you need to get rid of it because you're opening up your tree in that case. But so it really depends on the reason. If you're just balancing, then cut back. You can look at your tree and cut it back to where you see underneath there's some growth nodes, but it's not that critical, and it's not as clear. The growth nodes on a citrus aren't as clear as like when you're pruning peaches and roses and things like that.
And then one more question. Do you have any idea what kind of citrus I might have? It has huge leaves, fruit the size of a large grapefruit, skin about 1 inch thick, and a white clear color inside, and the taste is bitter. I'm thinking rootstock or something, but
it's possible. The other thing is it could be a grapefruit that, so I mean, we really have to see it, a piece of it, cut it, and we have to look at what time you picked it. Because know this too, in our cool climate, when you get a tag on the tree that says like a navel that it's ripe in November, we're used to our Christmas orange navel oranges. You let them stay on that tree 3 months longer, at least in our climate, because we don't have the heat to ripen them that quickly. So everything is later for us in the Monterey Bay. The citrus sweetness is later, and they hang on later. I'm eating navels right now that are at their peak. They weren't at their peak in December. They were tart. So I don't have Christmas navels, but my Valencias that are a summer ripening orange, they're ready at Christmas. So things are later for us. Citrus, avocados. I can't say for stone fruits that that's the case, but it is for citrus and avocado. We're 3 to 4 months later than what that tag says. That tag is for the ideal climate for that plant in California, which is usually southern or more inland in the valley areas where it's hotter. So that fruit you have, I've seen a real bitter, sour thing that looked just like a grapefruit, and it was like what they call a marsh grapefruit, and it's one of those grapefruits that needs desert heat to get sweet. But as was mentioned, it could be, if it has a smooth skin. I'm not sure of a rootstock that has a real smooth skin. I've seen rootstocks that they're rough and bumpy, and they're bitter, yellow or orange, or they look like a big, bumpy, warty lemon, and they have a thick skin, but the fruit tastes like a mild lemon. It's like a ponderosa. So some of them are still edible, but most aren't. They're bitter. But if it looks like a grapefruit, and it could be either a pomelo that isn't getting sweet because it needs more heat, or it could be a deserty grapefruit that was just not right for our weather. And the funny thing is you can go to nurseries and they'll have things that'll do well here and things that'll do well hotter. And people get seduced by the idea of a ruby star grapefruit. But I wouldn't buy it for here. I don't know how sweet it would get. I'd stay with, if you want a grapefruit flavor, stay with the Oro Blanco.
So here's a question about fruit thinning. When my tree starts fruiting, how much of the fruit should be cut off? For example, do I keep 1 fruit for every branch or 1 for every 6 inches? Does that apply to citrus?
I do that for plums and peaches because your branches crack and break. You can break a citrus tree with too much fruit too, but it bends a lot before it breaks. And you can prop it up. You kind of have to see how your tree fruits. The biggest reason I thin out, the only tree I thin is my Kishu mandarin because it oversets. And if I don't, they're the size of a shooter marble. If any of you ever remember marbles, there's a gazillion little shooter marble fruits that takes forever to peel. They're delicious, but they're little. And even thinning, it's still a smaller mandarin, but they're so tasty. We just love them. My little grandson gets out there and he points and I peel, and he loves them. But so thin, I don't know of any set formula, but because they do grow, a lot of the stylists to grow in clusters. So maybe thin to, maybe 3 in the cluster if it's a smaller fruit. If it's a big orange, I see Robertson oranges, they cluster like that. But I've never thinned it and I've never had a breakage problem. I have propped up trees. When I see the trees start to, as the fruit gets bigger and fuller and more full of juice, the boughs will bend. So I just take 2x4s and cut them right length and prop those branches up so it relieves the strain on them so they don't split or break off.
Thanks, Loretta. Are there any other questions? I think we've run through them all. Sorry if I missed any. Just come off mute and ask your question.
I had a question actually. With some of our other trees, my husband loves these things called tree diapers that are, I'm not sure what they're made of, but I don't like the name myself. They go around the tree trunk and you kind of fill them with water, and then it just slowly lets the water ease into the ground. Is that something that would work for citrus, or would that be an issue? Would it keep it too damp?
Wow. Well, it depends. So is your soil real heavy? Or because I have really sandy soil, and something like that, it wouldn't bother it because it drains. But if you had a really heavy soil to begin with, and you're doing that because you want the water, I don't see it all that different from a drip. But how long do these diapers hold their water? Because think of that as you have a drip system on that long.
Yeah, a month. I mean, a long time.
Oh, they
Weeks.
stay that long with water. And you have a heavy soil?
Not really. It's really rocky, and so I mean,
Okay.
we have it on a couple of apricot trees, and they seem to be doing fine. And we do have a little Meyer lemon that has one, but it has been struggling. It's finally this year looks like it may live from the difficult transplant of a couple of years ago. Anyway,
Yeah,
but
they can shock. They can shock and do nothing for. I've had a tree sit there 2 years without doing anything, and I thought, man, was I rough when I transplanted it? And it's just dependent on the tree. I think I treat all my trees the same. Who knows? But anyway, and so I would treat that thing as kind of like a drip system. And if you have rocky, gravelly soil that drains really fast, it might be beneficial. The symptoms of too much water on a citrus tree will be kind of leaves turning black and falling off. It won't grow, right? Because that you're not just watering the tree. There's all that life into the soil, right? All those microbes, and they need air too. So if there's so little air, because it's all where those air spaces are always filled with water, it's not good for the microbial life under that tree. So,
okay.
but your soil could be justify it.
Yeah. I mean, it actually has leaves this year. Last year it had maybe 2 leaves. It's a little very tiny thing, and it's definitely, we just decided to keep watering it because there was a tiny bit of green to see if it would live.
Good.
And
sometimes
it looks like
trees,
it will.
Yeah, sometimes trees are too little. A lot of times those little citrus and sleeves, I will put them in a 5-gallon pot for a year or two just because I think they're too tiny to be, they have to be babied a lot more when they're really tiny. And so I'd rather baby them in a pot where I can control things and put them and grow them up to be a little bigger and then plant them out.
Yeah.
So.
I launched it too soon, maybe. Kind of a related thing. There's quite a bit of wind where it is, and I understand sometimes that citrus is not a fan of wind. Do you have thoughts about that?
It doesn't like the wind, especially if there's ocean salt in the wind. Oh, it just defoliates the citrus big time. But you block the wind with different things. If if you can't get it up to size to where it can kind of shield itself, does it seem to be suffering? The symptoms would be, well, the leaves will dry up and fall off, or it'll just blow the leaf off. It'll weaken and then fall off right at the little where the petiole attaches to the stem. It will just fall off.
Okay.
And you'll, on the windward side of your tree, if you see a lot of bare little branchlets and sticks, it's the wind. And the only way you can help that is by blocking it with something.
Okay.
Or maybe try to transplant in the winter. And no, it'll probably shock. If it isn't that big of a tree, it may go into shock, but there may be a better place for it, and then maybe it can recover.
Right. Okay. Just those are sort of general questions, and in addition to my own
They
personal
don't like
tree,
the
but
wind. No, they like to be protected from windy air.
right. I don't think we realized how windy it was there until we put it there. So anyway,
I think that's all the questions we have from the.
right. Let's see.
Okay, so we can go on to some of the other things. Upcoming classes. Regenerative soil techniques for the home gardener. Oh, I might want to do that one. Sierra Azul is a really good nursery out here in Watsonville, and yeah, that's probably geared toward the microbial life in your soil, and it's so vital to everything that grows. And even in pots, you need microbes in there too. So whenever I pot things up and use a potting soil, I do a handful of a good garden soil from where there's a healthy tree growing, because it's like a little seed of good microbes to put in that pot too. Maybe it's all in my head, but I always like to seed it with a little good growing dirt in a potting soil. What's the next one? In-person workshop, collecting California native wildflower seeds. Wow, that sounds really good. Pacific Grove Natural Museum of Natural History for all the native lovers. And then I have another class next month on avocados. So it's my goal to have an avocado a day ripe. I'm not there yet because some of my trees are still really young, but I've learned from a lot of experts that grow around here of which varieties will grow and do well and which don't and why. So come listen again if you want to try to grow an avocado on your place. There's good ones for the Monterey Bay, surprisingly. We are not ideal avocado climate, just like we aren't ideal citrus. We aren't ideal avocado. It wants more heat and in the summer. But we can still grow some pretty good ones.
Right. All right, if we got all our questions, we have just a couple of reminders. We do have a follow-up survey, one that will come directly from us, hopefully in the next week or so. And then usually it takes a little bit longer, but the state UC program will also send you a survey. And we really appreciate if you can fill out both of them. The one for us directly really helps us make positive changes in our classes and make them the best classes they possibly can be for you. And then, of course, the state one, it really helps for them to know how effective all of our all of us are being in sharing this really important information with you for your garden. So if you can keep an eye out for both of those. And there are some additional resources along here that will come with the slide deck. And then, of course, the recording for the class will come very soon for you as well. So don't panic if you missed a minute or you got here a little bit late. Everything's fine. You'll get it all. Is there anything else you can think of, Joy?
There's one more
Loretta?
slide. There's one more slide.
Is there?
We're having a garden party at our brand new demonstration garden at Pinto Lake County Park on June 1st. And everyone's invited to come. There'll be food, there'll be hopefully music if there's Wi-Fi. There's self-guided garden tours and kids activities. So please come out. You're welcome to come out. Again, Saturday, June 1st, it's on our website. And if you're on our mailing list, you'll get a reminder. So please come. We're excited about this new place. It's fabulous, and it's just starting. So we wanted to get also feedback from all of you about what we could do, and we're teaching more classes out there. So consider yourselves all invited, and please invite your friends.
Nice.
Okay. All right.
I haven't In
That's-
that, yeah, I
thank-
have to check that out.
It's really a beautiful, beautiful place. The Pinto Lake Park
Nice.
altogether is really great. And then our garden is just looking amazing, I think.
Wow.
I might be biased. What can I say? So I also want to apologize today for some technical issues. And I'm at some point going to try and stop sharing and end this meeting, but I can't see where my mouse is. So that's part of why we've been having a few little glitches here. But anyway, we'll try and get that as smoothly as possible. Thank you for your patience as things went a little bit awry here and there. And Loretta, thank you so much. I've learned a whole bunch, and I suspect everyone else has too. And you did a great job. And Joy, thank you for supporting me, especially with my lack of ability. So I'll see what I can do
Absolutely.
here
It's always
to
a
ease us out.
team
But
effort.
thank you everybody else for coming too. We
Yes,
really
thank you for
appreciate
your
you.
patience.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll see you, I hope, at one of our next classes. If not the in-person classes, we've got Loretta coming next month to talk about avocados. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.